Hey guys, this will serve as a comprehensive block overview for the next 12 weeks. Okay, so we are going to be starting this block next week on October 3rd, and that will run through December 18th. Now, the goal of this video is to go over basically what we're doing and why, and also give you guys very specific guidelines on how you as an individual can approach this. What to expect from volume, recovery, how to think about nutrition, and things to just kind of consider from a lifestyle standpoint in this block specifically to allow us to really ramp up towards the open season and beyond. As we come out of this, knowing that we were kind of peaking for beach brawl and these other competitions, training will change fairly drastically as far as what the focus is for the next 12 weeks. All right, so basically the objective is going to be able to lay the foundation for strength, conditioning, skill development that's going to be needed for the season, all right? That means for the strength, we're going to try to increase our speed, working on some dynamic effort stuff, absolute strength when it comes to like actual squatting and pulling and pressing, and then just becoming more consistent in the Olympic lifts, okay? So we're going to be looking at just becoming consistent and making sure that we can hit those reps consistently, especially as it starts to get heavy before we get into the next season, which is going to be a lot more battery work and density work of the snatch and clean and jerk. So you can think of this as being really the last big push for strength development, or at least allow us to get the most gains. And that said, it's going to you really got to kind of focus on how we're hitting things in intensity, and we'll get into that, especially when it comes to the conditioning and how that needs to be approached. So for gymnastics, accumulating volume in pressing and pulling, and also on our hands, like we want to really kind of think about spending a lot more time in basically the handstand position and wall walks, things like that. Just starting to think about like kind of like getting the joints prepared and working on the core positions of the hollow and arch position. To think about like that's how we want to really think about building the base foundation that's going to allow you to be successful, especially when we start adding more reps and more fatigue to our base movements. The conditioning, we have two main systems we're going to be looking at, right? We'll be looking at the aerobic system and the anaerobic system. The way this will kind of start out is really focusing on building our aerobic base. So we have that as 30 to 60 minutes of movement. We'll build to aerobic threshold, which would be more 10 to 30 minutes, and maybe even a little bit as far as it could be even shorter, but really thinking about that being, zone 2, maybe touches in zone 3. Thinking about building the power of your aerobic capacity, okay? So thinking about the base being what's going to allow us to recover, allow us to handle more volume, allow us to move from one movement to the next, and thinking about the aerobic threshold as being something that's actually going to allow us to just move faster and keep things very aerobic, especially when we get into doing, movements like thrusters and pull-ups. We want to try to make those movements very aerobic. And then we have the anaerobic threshold, which is going to be a little bit higher intensity than zone 3, zone 4, where we're starting to really kind of breathe heavy and become labored, and we do need to do that. We do need to get touches in that. But we'll basically build towards that, and the last will be max oxygen consumption or VO2 max type stuff, which is absolute max effort as far as for aerobic system of being able to be at 100% of your VO2 max and holding that for 1 to 6 minutes. You can think of that as 5 minutes of burpees, something like that, where we have to really push hard in a very specific movement. Now, on the anaerobic system, we're building absolute strength already, but we're going to start out with alactate power, which is going to allow us to produce power, take that absolute strength and actually produce it into, max air bike sprints, things like that is what we'll be pushing. And then we'll slowly start working towards, the lactate system and working on lactic capacity, which is kind of similar to that O2 consumption, except it's even more intense and is going to take even more to recover from. In our sports specific, we really want to kind of think about this staying fairly aerobic on one of these days and even playing around with that aerobic threshold. So again, thinking about taking movements that we do every day, like pull-ups, wall balls, thrusters, snatching, cleaning, everything that like barbell cycling. And we're trying to actually make that very aerobic. So that should be something that we're taking a weight that we know we can cycle. If, say it was a power clean and we're doing 10 reps on the minute in the middle of this, mixed with some monostructural, which is basically just to keep the heart rate up, but again, trying to focus on keeping it in a very specific range and learning how to like improve movement efficiency and cycle rates. And that's really what I think about. And this can be done in EMOM circuits, those like repeat type touches, things like that. So we'll be doing that once a week, maybe a couple other times as we get going. But at first, we really want to kind of hammer out the monostructural stuff with the aerobic system and have one day where we're going to keep kind of thinking about maintaining touches. And then we're going to have one intensity CrossFit day, which is very traditional CrossFit type workouts. The whole goal here is to kind of maintain, how to push intensity and have that feel for competition. Like we don't want to lose our edge. So think about like keeping our edge pretty sharp. And so that's why all the other pieces that we do must be adhered to when it comes to intensity. If we push the aerobic work that we're going to be doing too hard, it is going to affect this. It's going to affect our recovery. It's going to affect how we can handle and how we improve from our strength and speed work. And it's going to really mess up our overall accumulation of fatigue when it comes to how this is going to affect the system. So when it says to go really hard, we want to go really hard. When it says to go easy, we do need to learn to go easy to allow ourselves to recover, and so we can push the intensity on these other very specific workouts that we want to hit. Okay, so moving on, kind of thinking about the same thing, let's talk about the strength a little bit, like what we're going to be doing, what you can expect. So we are going to be doing some speed work, banded, plyos, dynamic effort, squatting and deadlifting. As we look at this, like the real focus here is moving faster than usual, building explosiveness in the fast twitch fibers. So it's super important to adhere to percentages, but also it's really important to learn what like fast is and what it looks like, because it is different for everybody. If you're an athlete that you can say it was 85% of your back squat was on the bar and you could push 10 plus reps at that, you're probably more of a slower athlete. You're probably not someone who's super explosive. So that's where speed work for you specifically is going to allow you to start pushing your fast twitch fibers and allow you to get more out of those absolute and push your absolute strength up by being able to move the bar faster. Okay, so when we're doing that, we want to make sure we're moving fast. So if you are moving slow and the percentage is supposed to be at 50 or 60% or whatever, we may drop the percentage for you specifically so you can get moving fast, because the only way to get faster is to move fast. So thinking about it like that is don't get so caught up in percentages and ask, film, ask Aaron, ask Coach Aaron, ask me, if this looks fast enough on these dynamic effort days to make sure you are pushing the right stimulus there. Now, our strength speed work, our snatch, power clean, push jerk, split jerk, those movements will be in there, once or twice a week. And really, again, we're focusing on making lifts. You need to be patient when we're talking about adding weight week to week. All right, we're not really trying to... And we're trying to build consistency and build the base, so the volume will be very high and the intensity will be very low to start. But as we continue to add intensity or add weight to the bar, you need to be able to consistently hit that. And if you jump through and you're skipping the 60 to 70%, you will have a hard time basically progressing once you get up to 70, 80%, because you've already went too heavy and you didn't have that big base build. So be patient. Focus on makes, focus on cleaning it up, focusing on being crisp at that 60%. If it's on the bar, move it fast, be crisp, be fast under the bar. Focus on your speed, focus on just moving your feet faster. All these things you can do at that 60 to 70%, that at 80%, if you did do that, 80%, 85%, 90% is going to feel a lot easier. So think about being patient, think about being crisp, think about being fast. That's what we're going to look to do. On the absolute strength for the lower body, back squats, some front squats, positional RDLs, and rack pulls. Okay, so focusing on basically pushing the volume early. So, I think there's 6x6s at the beginning, so it's pretty high volume. And we will be building intensity. On the positional lifts, focus on maintaining sound mechanics. So if it's a snatch, grip, RDL, then it's actually, it is a wider grip, but the shoulder should be set back and down. You need to be thinking about a slow, controlled tempo. And as you get to the knee, you can actually send the knees forward. It's very positional and it's very slow. Okay, so if you just rush through these, this isn't the speed day stuff. This isn't stuff that we're looking to be fast. Now, a snatch pull is supposed to be fast. A snatch grip RDL should be slow and should be positional. Okay, so we're thinking about increasing the time of retention and building the mechanics of those movements, and thinking about really owning every single inch of those movements when it comes to the RDLs or even rack pulls or things like that. So kind of keep that in mind. That's what we're going to be looking for. On the upper body, we'll be doing an absolute strength focus, and we'll basically be alternating between bench and overhead press. I thought we got a lot out of pressing from doing a lot of bench pressing, and I think we've already built a sound foundation of that. So kind of keep that in mind. We'll start out moving volumes between 80 and 90%, and we'll build to like maximal efforts each week. But really focus on accumulating reps above 90% without form breaking down each week, because the sets will maybe start at 75 and you'll have very set percentages. Just know that fatigue will set in, and so hitting an absolute 1 rep max isn't always going to happen, and I want you guys to be a little patient about that. But at the same time, hitting above 90% is what we're looking to do on these days, and this can look like 5-5, 3-3, 2-2, or 5-4, 3-2-1, things like that. Those kinds of sets. We are looking at those last few sets being very heavy and trying to get those last few sets above 90%. Getting the last 1 to 2 sets above 90% is going to allow us to hit that stimulus of maximal effort without form breaking down and having the risk of injury, and being able to basically recover from that. All right, on the hypertrophy work, which we'll be using barbells, dumbbells, and gymnastics to do this. One day we'll be focused on back and arms. And when I say arms, it might be triceps, it might be some bicep work. But we'll kind of see based on if we're going to be doing some other CrossFit stuff, that arm piece might just go out the window. But we will be doing a lot of back work one day, and then on another day doing a lot more chest and shoulder and tricep work, okay? Focus on hitting the rep ranges, okay? Taking these sets close to failure is what we're going to be looking at doing, but we need to be able to increase load or increase reps weekly, and that'll be written in the notes, so make sure you're reading that. But this is also just as much about building contractile volume for muscular endurance, as it is getting big. So that just means like, if we're doing sled rows or something like that, and, we accumulate, as you're rowing, you could accumulate 200 reps of rows. This is going to build the base that's going to allow us to do 200 pull-ups one day. This is what you got to think about is it is about pushing sets. And as we get down to talking about recovery and eating and things like that, it is going to be super important that you guys are eating enough so you're not super sore and you're not super wrecked from this type of training. Next, gymnastics. We have basically 3 things with skill, maintenance, and volume. For the skill, really kind of focusing on handstand push-ups, handstand walk, pull-ups, muscle-ups, things that are a little higher skill that we know we can do. This will be lower volume, higher focus. We're trying to improve technique and positions. We may add towels, we may add tempos. This is where we train the movements and not necessarily the standards. Okay, so just kind of make sure you're reading the notes and you think, oh, well, the CrossFit standard is always this. Like, that stuff changes, so make sure you're really focusing on what we're writing and how that's being written to allow you guys to hit it. Okay, so we are going to learn how to move slow and build strength and consistency through each piece of the movement, right? So if it is a tempo handstand push-up and we're talking about going slow on the way down, it's super important to do that. We're going to have some ring dip tempos early on, like, pushing those sets and making sure that you're staying in a hollow position and you're keeping the shoulder tight and you're keeping the rings in tight is very important as far as building that out right now so we can have that stuff later on, okay? So that's one, like, there's going to be multiple pieces that could be mixed in throughout the week, so just kind of keep that in mind. That high focus, low volume is what we're going to be doing. On the maintenance, we're going to be doing skill movements in the Metcon, so that, like, 1 to 2 days a week that we already talking about in those EMOMs, those high intensity days. And we'll be doing functional volume only. And so functional volume is essentially, the amount of work that's generally in, basic CrossFit Metcon benchmarks. like roughly 50 pull-ups, 50 chest to bar pull-ups. Now I know, that functional volume goes up as you get more competitive, but we're basically just going to put in enough reps and sets that allows you to keep sets aerobic and thinking about breathing and movement efficiency, making this given movement more smooth and less taxing. So as we get into those higher intensity, higher volume sets, you already have a very good, movement quality and ability to efficiently move from set to set and to understand where you are and what that looks like for you specifically. All right, so volume, definitely early on, like focusing on like wall holds, handstand walk variations, hollow arch positions, side planks, and strict pulling. Always, that volume accumulation may be in your warm-ups, so make sure you guys are reading your warm-ups and kind of thinking about it. But, this is going to be deliberate. Look at this, like deliberate positional holds to build your default positions to powerful ones. So, that default position in a pull-up when looking at the hollow arch position as you're doing your kip swings, that default position is what you're naturally going to go to as you get tired. Okay, so if you have, you're breaking at the legs and you're really arching your back really hard early on, that is your default position. If we can learn to tighten up those positions, using towels, using hollow holds, hollow arch positions on the floor, that will allow us to basically prolong how long we can hold those positions and kind of stave off fatigue, especially as we start adding in volume and adding in other movements to this. Okay, next is going to be the conditioning. All right, so for this conditioning, if we go back up to this chart here, we talked about already like working our way down on the aerobic system or, working our way up on the anaerobic system when it comes to time domains. So kind of keep that in mind. We're basically doing that with biking, rowing, sleds, and ski. So in that aerobic base, thinking about starting out slow and gradually building intensity to that sport specific. These longer pieces must remain in the create heart rate zones, which is going to be roughly 1 and 2. And I'll kind of write up what that is, for you guys and give you guys generally it's going to be 125 beats a minute to 165 beats a minute for pretty much everybody. Like that's pretty close, give or take 5 beats per minute. Of each of those, that's a pretty good range for everybody to kind of sit in. And if you always have to guess which one you are in, always guess lower, okay? And guess a little higher on the low end. So if you're like 25 beats per minute, maybe you're going to 30. And on that, 65, if you go to 60, you're still going to be in that aerobic zone 1 or 2, mixing them both up. So kind of keep that in mind. That is super important because that's what's going to allow us to recover from specific sets, recover from longer or multiple pieces, and really build that base. And this doesn't take a lot of excessive warming up to do. This doesn't take something that it does take a lot of time to hit these longer pieces, but you should be able to just get on there and get going straight away. So these sessions, especially these longer hour-long sessions, I would try to keep them to their own thing. Like, if you could separate them, awesome. If not, then it is what it is, but just kind of keep that in mind is what we're doing. Now, as we get to, it also is super important to stay in those zones because we don't want to affect that speed and strength development. Okay, so if we end up going too hard, too fast, we get anaerobic in any of these, it can affect how much we're actually effectively staying in those zones and then how much it actually changes what we're trying to do as far as for the strength work, whether that's causing excessive fatigue or just training into we're building up too much muscular fatigue from a movement that really shouldn't be like that. Okay, so it should be something that we should be able to handle for a long period of time. Now on this anaerobic system, like these sets will always be like full send or close to full send. So this is where you're going to build your ability to push maximal intensity during efforts. Okay, these are very potent. So they need to be hit with the intended efforts, but don't try to make up these on different days, or at least ask, because if we're going into we have one low volume day of this and one high volume day of this, if you're going into that from that high volume day into the next day being something that's also going to be really hard, you might not get as much out of that, especially if you're going to be doing some sort of heavy snatching the next day or something like that. So kind of keep that in mind. It's also not something that we really hit at the beginning of any session ever. So Don't think like, oh, I'm just gonna jump on the bike, do these sprints, and then go into other stuff. Typically, that stuff's gonna be saved for a finisher, or even like closer to the day before a rest day or something like that. So kind of keep that in mind. On the sports specific, when we look at like volume and things that I for sure think we need to hit, especially when we look at the quarterfinals and even the open a little bit, but more quarterfinals. Lunges, making sure that we're hitting all those lunges, the overhead lunges, kind of building to that. Starting out with front rack lunges and things like that, and then building to those overhead lunges as we improve our positions. Single leg jumping, double unders, high volume double unders, being able to recover from those kinds of things. Shuttle runs, obviously improving speed and getting faster and trying to get to where our default is 10 a minute. I mean, that's pretty aggressive, but if we could get to where we're close to 10 a minute, that would be awesome. GHD sit-ups, focusing on starting out very, very consistent, like, hey, here's how much volume we're doing, and then improving and looking to get to where we're doing at least 100 of these a week, maybe even more as we get closer to competition season. But even in this accumulation phase, building up to 100 of those a week. So that's all going to be written in. I've already taken a lot of time to detail out how many we're doing each week. Burpees, same thing, like trying to build to 100 of those a week and making that something we can very consistently do. Especially when it comes to like burpee box jump overs and burpee bar facing burpees and things like that. So kind of keep that in mind. And then wall walks, again, not something that creates a lot of excessive fatigue the next day. So that one specifically we can do a lot of and start working on that. And that also kind of helps us work on that, stacking the joint and just being inverted more. That's what we were talking about. Now, when we look at this, we are going to focus on movement quality on these days of the EMOMs and repeated efforts. On those intensity days, push it like it's an open workout. I know for specifically, I'll have notes for like the GHD sit-up. I want you guys, especially on these EMOMs that we're riding, is really focus on doing them correctly. Straightening the legs hard, working on getting that snap at the leg and at the hip as you're coming up. This will improve your ability as we start moving on again to when we get tired, being able to do this correctly and staying safe. Okay. Lastly, let's just kind of talk about the block and how to kind of approach this. All right. Now, volume is going to be high. There's going to be a lot of pieces to do in the day. The time in the gym is typically between 90 and 120 minutes. All right. It is possible, if it is possible to split sessions, that's great. If you only have time to complete one session of 60 to 90 minutes, then it's okay to prioritize that and prioritize your weakness. All right. On top of that, if you're doing those longer, you're doing a 2-hour block, you guys need to start thinking about, intra workout, carbohydrates and protein. So like protein powder, fruit juices, things like that are something that's really important to sip on during your strength work and during your gymnastic work. So think like your first half of your work, you're sipping on even Gatorade, things like that to start replacing glycogen. So then if you go to do some sort of bike afterwards or something like that, you just have the energy to do it. So think about and consider having something that you can take. This isn't taking electrolytes. Now that's important to take as well, or BCAAs, none of that shit. We're just talking about actually getting in some sort of fuel, which is going to be carbohydrates mostly, but then some protein as well. So kind of think about that and getting that going, especially if you're spending that much time in the gym. And I need to kind of edit this nutrition to mention that. So general ways to kind of break down athletes is, those that need improvement in gymnastic skill and volume, you need to focus on that gymnastic and that upper body hypertrophy. That's what you should definitely prioritize. That doesn't mean that's all you hit on that day, but if it's all you have time for, that is all you hit on that day. None of these guidelines should you be trying to miss everything every week and only do this. So kind of keep that in mind as we need to be hitting everything, but this is what you'd focus on. So then if you need improvement on general movement and conditioning, so that just means like, maybe you do struggle with recovery, or maybe you do struggle just with your movement quality, then you do want to kind of make sure you're hitting, the focused skill work on barbell and gymnastics and the conditioning, and that's to include the sport-specific EMOMs and things like that. And you maybe cut out some of the hypertrophy work. You maybe cut out some of the absolute strength work. And I'm not saying all of it, but some of it. You just prioritize it on the day. You don't try to miss, that absolute strength and stuff every single week, and you should be fine. So just kind of keep that in mind. And then there's those that need absolute strength. So that means you're going to make sure that you're really focusing on the barbell strength and strict gymnastics. If I had to choose what you would actually do conditioning wise, I would still hit the slower aerobic work, especially because that's going to be your active recovery day. So I would still hit that slower aerobic work just to make sure you're hitting it in, but you maybe skip the intense CrossFit pieces. To be honest, that might be what you would skip, is the one intense CrossFit piece a week. You just skip that and you focus on getting bigger and stronger. Now, all these are just guidelines, so don't hesitate to have a conversation about what is best for you specifically, because there is a lot of nuance even in between these. But I just want to give you guys some general guidelines to think about. Hey, this is a lot of time in the gym. What can I do? How do I kind of change it? At the end of the day, I want to be able to produce the most competitive athletes we can. And that is going to require, it just requires bigger base blocks. It requires more training. And there's only so much time in the week. And to actually make this change, there has to be some sort of commitment. But again, I know you guys, this isn't an individual program for any of you guys. So kind of keep that in mind, is that it's okay if you have to miss some things. Just communicate it with us so we can actually have a plan of being like where you're missing stuff. You may even miss certain things on one week and certain things on the next week, but just communicate that. I'm happy to have that conversation and find out what works best for you individually and try to tailor it to you as most I can. Now, next is nutrition. So this is not the time for most of you to be eating in a caloric deficit, all right? The goal is to get bigger, stronger, and faster, and to do those things, like you must maintain eating at or above your maintenance calories. Recomposition, we'll have time for that, 6 to 8 weeks before we get into the open. That's a plenty of time to have a slow mini cut going into it and doing it correctly. So thinking about, if considering adding, 1 to 5 pounds a week, depending on your current size and leanness. General recommendation is to kind of weigh yourself every morning and then just take the median weight. So you're not really taking the average. You're saying if you had 7 days, whatever one is actually in the middle, that's where you kind of sit. That's what you call your weekly weight. And you're just trying to add, again, that half a pound to a pound a week. And that's it. So not only is this about getting bigger, stronger, and faster, we're really looking at this to ensure you're eating a caloric surplus and you're getting enough to recover, okay? If your weight starts drastically dropping a pound, a half a pound a week, and you don't have the body fat to support that, you're going to hit, you're basically going to go all the way down. You're basically going to get to the point of burnout, okay? So it is important to think about at least maintaining your weight every single week, saying like, hey, here's where my weight is. And you have to, and this is something like, I have to weigh myself every morning. Yeah, it's not that big of a deal, but it is something that you need to commit to ensure you understand where you're at. You might even stay at the same weight and start getting leaner, and that's totally fine. But we want to make sure that we're staying at the same weight, at least, unless you're someone who does have excessive body fat and you feel like you need to lean out. And if you do that, then we should talk about that. So if you are considering a cut, then just understand that you may need to do less volume. Your performance will probably suffer, okay, when it comes to like absolute output of strength. You may be able to still hit like the high volume stuff really well. You'll still be able to hit the conditioning fairly well because we're just doing zone training anyway. But just understand that like you still don't want to lose more than a half a pound to a pound a week to do that successfully. If you drop 2-3 pounds a week, unless you're a 200 plus guy, but think about 1% as like at like most that you would lose. If you end up dropping that really quickly, you are going to lead to burnout. You can lead to energy and just an overall fatigue, and that's really not what we're trying to do either. Okay, so recovery. All right, this is not the time you necessarily need to concern yourself with monitoring how much you're socializing. Like if you're going out and you're having fun, like that's totally fine. It's okay to miss a workout here and there to get extra recovery. All right, enjoy your meals and your time with your family without stressing about it. The main thing is that you just keep your sleep in check. Okay, so 8 to 10 hours will drastically improve your success. As far as like how well you're recovering day to day, having enough energy, having the body actually repair itself. It's super important to get that 8 to 10 hours. If you start dropping that or you start losing some sleep here and there, it will start accumulating and catching up to you. All right. So, like on top of that, like the biggest thing there that I think that most people have to kind of look out for is alcohol and how much it does affect sleep. So there really is no good reason for anyone to consume alcohol, okay, especially athletes. So you just need to be aware of how much you're drinking, trying to drink in moderation, and trying not to affect your sleep. If you're going out every single week and fucking going on a 1 to 2 day bender every single week, I mean you're not recovering, and you're taking days, if not a week, to recover. So just keep that in mind. So if you make those choices, you need to understand that they have consequences, and you can't look back and be like, oh, well, I didn't recover. Wasn't able to train. Training was off. And it's your fault. So just accept it. Okay. So keep that in mind. Now, again, if you drink in moderation and try to limit it and actually socialize, that's cool. Just make sure you're still prioritizing sleep and eating and all those other things. Now, communication is going to be key. Logging consistently in, WOD up, make sure we can see that, even adding notes on how you're feeling, and have a conversation about, if you're feeling off, like let's just talk, say, hey, like I'm feeling a little beat up here and there. We modify slightly, and that's what we're going to do. So modifying your training from time to time is going to be necessary. Again, like I said, this program is not an individual program. It is a basically general program for what we see everybody, where we see everybody at, and we want to think about this program being very specific to the sport and what we need to do to be successful in the sport. But it isn't written to your exact schedule. It isn't written to your exact weakness, even though I do believe that what we're doing is going to improve everybody's weaknesses. So that in mind, being able to prioritize if you have very specific weaknesses on what not to miss, what you could potentially miss, and then just thinking about how you're going to respond to it. So you're going to respond a little differently. You may, the squat volume might be too much for you. The pressing volume may be too much for you. Your upper body might be too sore. Those are easy little modifications we can make with just communicating. So kind of keep that in mind, and I'll do my best to kind of help tailor that to you. But if you miss something, don't sweat it. Just try not to miss the same thing every week, like we talked about. And the big thing there is just being okay with just communicating, and being okay with missing things, and being okay with just understanding that we will make the best of it no matter what. Okay. So that kind of sums it up, guys. I know it's a lengthy video. Those of you guys that watch the end, you should have a pretty good grasp of what the expectations are. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And let's get after it. Let's start. This is the first block of the season. All right, so let's have a good one.